Welcome to Deep Sleep Stories. Tonight, let the weight of your day melt gently into stillness. In this original bedtime story, The One Who Stayed, we follow the quiet journey of a man who fell from the sky, and chose, at last, to land in something deeper than air. This is not a story of war. This is a story of peace, of presence, healing, and what it means to stay. So close your eyes, take a slow breath, and let the world around you fall quiet. You are safe here. You are exactly where you need to be. And if you enjoyed these gentle journeys, consider subscribing. There are always more stories waiting beyond the clouds. Not every landing is on Earth. Some are inside someone else's silence. The sky was burning. Not with fire, but with sound. A tearing rupture through the clouds. A heavy-winged beast groaning against the weight of the night. Then came the flash. Low. Too low. And silence again, so sudden it pressed itself into the chest like a held breath. Clara Vizin sat in the old schoolhouse, hands curled around a chipped porcelain cup. The chicory tea had long gone cold. A shawl lay over her shoulders, and a book she hadn't really been reading rested open on her lap. The fire crackled faintly in the stove behind her. When the noise came, that ripping groan followed by the muffled crack of something metal meeting earth, she didn't flinch. She simply set the cup down, listened, waited, then rose. Outside, the village of Saint Remy slept under a worn blanket of mist. The houses, what few remained intact, were shuttered against the November cold. The rain had stopped hours before, but the ground still wept. Thin trails of water crept along the stones, whispering as they went. Clara stepped into her boots, fastened her coat, and lit the lantern. Its glow was weak, but steady, like her. She walked alone into the night. Fields stretched out beyond the school, once vibrant with children's laughter, now empty. The wind moved low along the grass, as if afraid to rise. The air smelled of wet soil, faint smoke, and the ghost of gunpowder carried from somewhere too far to see. Then she saw it. A dark shape at the edge of the field, broken, heavy still. A plane. It had come down hard. One wing cracked cleanly in half, the other folded under like a wounded bird. Mud sprayed in long streaks behind the fuselage, where tires had torn through earth too tired to resist. Steam hissed faintly from the engine. One propeller spun once, then stopped. And in the open cockpit, a man. Clara moved closer. Her boots sank into the churned mud with every step, but she didn't hurry. Her breath came calmly, evenly. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because fear had long ago become a background noise. The pilot slumped forward, his jacket dark with water, his hair matted to his forehead. There was blood at his temple, fresh and thin. His hands hung loose at his sides. But his chest rose. Slowly. He was breathing. Clara reached out, touched his neck. The skin was cold, but the pulse beneath it flickered, steady and alive. She looked around. No one else. No German patrols. No villagers. No movement. Only her. And him. She moved with purpose, sliding his arm over her shoulder, shifting his weight against her. He was tall, taller than she'd expected, and heavy with unconsciousness. One foot dragged behind him, boots thick with wet soil. They moved inch by inch, past the edge of the field, toward the road, toward the old schoolhouse. It took time, and breath, and silence, but she did not stop. The schoolhouse stood on the hill, stone dark with age. Once a place of learning, then silence, now survival. Clara had lived there alone since 1942. There was one cot, a stove, a washbasin, and books on every shelf, none of them opened in months. She pulled open the door with her back, guiding him inside with careful steps. The floor creaked as it always had. She laid him down on the cot gently, adjusting his coat, brushing wet strands of hair from his face. The candlelight caught the glint of a silver wing pinned to his chest. Royal Air Force. A British pilot. Still young. 30, perhaps. Lips pale. Skin cold. She moved quickly now. stripped off his gloves, undid the top buttons of his jacket, checked his side for bleeding. He groaned once, a faint, dry sound in a language she recognized but did not speak. English. She hushed him softly, pressing a damp cloth to his brow. "You'll be all right," she whispered. "Rest. Rest now." The room settled again. She placed another log in the stove. Warmth spread slowly. Outside, the sky had darkened further, if such a thing were possible. No moon. No stars. Only heavy cloud. Only memory. She sat beside him, not to watch, but to remain. The pilot breathed unevenly. His fingers twitched once. But sleep, or something like it, had taken him. Clara leaned her head back, eyes fixed on the cracked plaster of the ceiling. She remembered another man once. A soldier. Her brother. Gone now, taken in 1940 when the lines collapsed and the retreat became chaos. She had never found his name on any list. Only silence. And now another man. Another silence. She wondered, not for the first time, if the sky ever gave back what it took. When the wind knocked gently at the window pane, she did not move. When the stove hissed, she closed her eyes. And when he stirred, barely, in the cot beside her, she reached out and placed her hand over his. A gesture. Nothing more. But something. That night, the sky did not roar again. It whispered. And beneath it, two people rested. One in recovery. The other in memory. Some homes offer shelter. Others offer silence. The rare ones offer both. Thomas Elwood came back to life the way winter turns to spring, slowly, and without permission. First came warmth. Then scent. Then breath. His eyes remained closed, but his mind began to remember the weight of a harness, the shudder of the fuselage, the snap of air against metal. Then the field. The impact. The dark. And then, the softness beneath him now. Not earth. Not death. A bed. His throat ached. His lips cracked with thirst. Every part of him felt heavy, like water-soaked cloth. But he breathed. And that alone was something. Slowly, his eyelids parted. The ceiling above was old, wooden, painted in some long-ago beige now faded to the color of old bones. A candle flickered nearby, its light painting moving shapes along the beams. He turned his head slightly. A window. Partly fogged. And beside it, a woman. She sat quietly in a worn chair. Her frame still, wrapped in a gray shawl. One hand rested on a closed book, the other near a chipped cup of something long gone cold. She wasn't young, but not old. Her posture carried a quiet discipline, as if she'd learned long ago how to wait. She looked peaceful, but alert. Thomas moved his lips. Nothing came. He tried again, and only a breath escaped, shallow and broken. The woman turned her head. Their eyes met. She stood. Some silences are walls. Others are windows. The days passed like slow ink across old paper. Thomas remained in the cot near the stove, wrapped in the warmth of stillness. He moved little, spoke not at all. But his eyes watched, always watched, as if each small motion in the room added another word to an unspoken conversation. He healed. Quietly. Clara kept no count of days, only of moments. The first time he opened both eyes, the second time he shifted his legs without flinching, the third time he looked directly at her, and did not look away. Each was something. On the morning of the fifth day, the sound of boots cracked across the stone step outside. Not German. Not military. Just familiar. Clara opened the door before the knock came. There stood Leo Marchand, sleeves rolled to his elbows, scarf loose, face unshaved, and fingers still smudged with oil from some engine he hadn't finished repairing. "You could have told me sooner," he muttered, stepping past her. "I didn't know if he'd live," she replied. "He does," Leo grunted. He walked straight to the cot. Thomas lay still, gaze following him. "RAF, from the look of it," Leo muttered, kneeling to inspect the patch on the jacket. "Bristol Blenheim." Twin prop. Probably from the second group. He glanced up. No dog tags? Clara shook her head. Nothing visible. Hiding something, he said. Then added gentler. Or maybe just surviving. Thomas blinked, but said nothing. Leo stood. I'll look at the wreck this afternoon. If it's the plane, I think, they're not easy to land, even on flat airstrips. He did well not to die. He turned back toward the door, then paused. Tell him I'll need a hand if he ever plans to leave again. Clara raised an eyebrow. He can barely sit. Leo smirked. So he'll have time to think about it. Later, Clara prepared broth over the stove. The room smelled of thyme and bay leaf, old wood and damp wool. Thomas followed each movement with his eyes. Still silent. Still there. She didn't speak to him. Not yet. But she hummed. Softly. A tune no one else would recognize. Just before dusk, the sound of small bells echoed from the north path, a rhythm only one person ever made. Sister Jean. Clara stepped outside to meet her. The old nun's frame was slight, her breast shallow from the uphill walk, but her eyes, bright as ever, held the weight of 100 winters. I heard, Jean said without greeting. Is he still with us? Yes. Clara nodded. Then he'll need this. She handed Clara a letter. No name. No address. Just folded parchment tied with a faded blue ribbon. Clara hesitated. Where? In the chapel's offering box, Jean replied. Someone left it there last night. No note? Only silence. Which is sometimes louder than intention. Clara looked at the envelope. The paper was soft, well folded. Old. It smelled faintly of lavender and ink. Do you think it's his? She asked. I don't think it's mine, Jean answered. And with that she turned and made her way down the hill again, her boots barely leaving prints in the cold dust. Clara stood there a moment longer, holding the letter in both hands. Then stepped inside. Thomas lay where she had left him. The room dim now, save for the flicker of the hearth. I have something, she said, holding up the envelope. He turned his head, eyes narrowing slightly. It was found in the chapel, she continued, seating herself. No name. No sender. But something tells me it's not lost. She placed it on the table beside the bed. Not offering. Not insisting. Just letting it be. Thomas didn't reach for it. But his eyes never left it. Later, as the candles burned low, Clara folded a wool blanket and placed it at the foot of the bed. She cleaned the tin cup, wiped the basin. The silence between them no longer felt empty, it felt inhabited. Like a language waiting for its first sentence. Before blowing out the final candle, she turned to him once more. If you ever want me to read it, she said gently, I will. Then paused. And if you don't, I'll still be here. Thomas blinked once. Slow. Intentionally. It was the closest thing to a word he'd given. And somehow, it was enough. That night, as wind brushed against the windows and the house settled into its bones, the envelope remained unopened. But not unread. It waited. Like all true letters do. Stepped forward, steady, without hesitation. Without speaking, she poured water from a ceramic pitcher into a metal cup, and gently pressed it to his lips. Her hand smelled faintly of soap and wood smoke. He drank. The water tasted like earth and tin and safety. Then he leaned back into the pillow, exhausted by the effort. You crashed, she said softly. Her French accent shaped the English into something almost musical. He blinked once. I found you in the field, she added. He tried to nod. Couldn't. You're safe here. She returned the cup to the table, adjusted the edge of the blanket across his chest. Then, instead of leaving, she stepped back to her chair. Saturday. Waited. Time passed. Perhaps an hour. Perhaps more. Thomas drifted between waking and not. In the moments when his eyes opened, she was always near. Reading. Mending a shirt. Lighting a second candle. but never speaking. Not until the envelope. She brought it out from a folder near the bookshelf, thick cream paper, yellowed at the corners. No address. No stamp. Only a folded letter. "I was cleaning the church last year," she said, her voice barely above the whisper of wind outside. "This was tucked behind a hymnal. No one claimed it. I didn't throw it away." She sat again and read aloud. "My dearest, the snow came early this year. The old birch outside your window still holds its leaves stubborn, like you. I tend the garden, though it grows little now. Still, I imagine you walking the rows with your hands behind your back, naming plants in your quiet voice." Thomas turned his head to face her more fully. Her voice carried something behind it. Not emotion exactly, but memory. Not hers, but something she held anyway. She continued, "I wear your scarf, though it's too long. It smells like wind and ash. Sometimes I press it to my face when I sleep. Write if you can. If you can't, then know that I still keep a place for you at the table. Your chair remains pulled out. Your boots by the door." Clara folded the letter slowly. She did not look at him right away. Then, softly, and without expectation, she said, "I think it was never sent. Or maybe it was returned. But I believe it was meant to be read. Even now." Thomas blinked. Once. Then closed his eyes. But not in sleep. In presence. She did impress. She stood. Moved to the basin. Rinsed the cup. Wiped the table. Each movement quiet. Lived in. This was not the first man she'd cared for. But something about him. About the way he listened, even without strength to answer. Felt different. She glanced back at him. He was watching her again. Not sharply. Not expectantly. Just watching. Like someone reading something in a language he almost understood. "Rest," she said gently. Then walked to the old stove and added a log. That evening, the wind carried the smell of chimney smoke across the hills. The trees groaned softly in their roots. Somewhere in the far woods, an owl called once, then fell silent again. Thomas did not sleep easily. But he remained still. And Clara, in the chair beside him, watched the candle flicker as though it were the last star in the sky. In that house, with no flag, no allegiance, no noise, two strangers shared the same air. And that, for now, was enough. Some nights don't ask for sleep. They ask you to witness? The fire was low, but not yet out. It pulsed quietly behind the iron grate, breathing orange light into the corners of the room. Would snap from time to time, the only sound besides the ticking of a small clock somewhere behind the bookshelves. Clara sat upright in her cot, arms crossed over her chest. Her body was exhausted, but her mind was drifting in slow circles, not from worry, but from something deeper, the weight of someone else's presence. She stood. Not out of necessity. Out of instinct. And padded barefoot into the main room. Thomas lay still in the cot. But his eyes were open, reflecting firelight. He turned his head toward her, not startled, not surprised. As if he had known she would come. Clara crossed the room silently. Sat near the hearth, not in her usual chair by the bed, but on the floor, closer to the warmth. For a few minutes she said nothing. The wind outside moved like breath, exhaled, held, returned. "I used to be afraid of nights like this," she said quietly. "The ones where you're not sure if the house is keeping you safe, or keeping you in." She looked over her shoulder. Thomas was watching her. Not intensely. Gently. "Before the war, this house was always full. My mother used to read poetry in the evenings. She believed if a home had books, it could never fall apart." Clara gave a soft smile, as if remembering the sound of that voice long gone. She never lived to see the silence after it. Thomas blinked slowly. His fingers moved, just slightly, curling in toward his palm. Like a reflex. Or a memory. Clara rose and moved to the shelf near the wall. She opened a small box tucked between two volumes. Inside, folded papers, worn at the edges. Letters. Dozens. She brought them back to the fire and sat cross-legged on the floor. I collect the ones no one claims, she explained. Letters left in chapels, dropped at train stations, forgotten at field hospitals. I can't explain why. I just don't like seeing words thrown away. She unfolded one gently and read aloud. To the one who held my hand before I left. I never said thank you. I never said anything. But I remembered your hand, even when I forgot my name. You held the part of me that still believed I would return. And maybe somehow that's why I did. She folded it again, placed it on the pile beside her. Another moment passed. I don't know who wrote that, or who it was meant for. But sometimes I think the letters themselves don't care. They just want to be heard. Thomas shifted again. Then, slowly, his voice, and used, rough like gravel, formed one word. Read another. Clara's breath caught. She looked up. He hadn't moved his head. Just his lips. Just that whisper. But it was enough to make her stillness unravel. She nodded. Smiled, not with joy, but something more sacred. Respect. She picked up a second page. And read. I never believed in promises. But I believed in the way you looked at me. If I come back broken, don't fix me. Just sit with me. Let me exist, unfinished, beside you. This time, when she folded it, she didn't place it back in the pile. She held it in her palm, pressed it once, then set it on the edge of the hearth like an offering. Thank you, she whispered. But not to the letter. To the man who had finally spoken. Thomas blinked again. A little faster this time. His gaze didn't drift. Clara stood and crossed to the small table. She pulled down a tin of dried herbs, boiled water over the fire, and let the steam rise. The scent of chamomile and lemon balm filled the room. I make this when I want to remember how to breathe, she said. She poured 2 cups. Set one near him, careful of his reach. I don't expect you to talk more, she added. That one word, it already told me enough. She sipped, closed her eyes. The fire crackled once. And Thomas exhaled. Long, deep. First time since he arrived. Later, when the night turned its face toward dawn, Clara pulled a blanket from the back of her chair and sat on the floor beside the cot. Not to watch him. Just to be near. And there, in the hush before light, she finally let her eyes close. Not from exhaustion. From trust. Sometimes it takes the questions of a boy to remind a man who he is. Morning came gray and slow. Not heavy with rain, but soaked with thought. The sky outside was a canvas of dull silver. Not a sunrise. A soft unveiling. Clara moved quietly through the house, the sleeves of her sweater rolled to her elbows. She warmed the leftover tea from the night before, added a few herbs from the cupboard, lemon balm, thyme, just enough honey to remind the water that sweetness still existed. She glanced at Thomas. Still in bed. Eyes open. Watching. No words yet this morning. But he had said 3 the night before. And she carried them like matches. Outside, wind pushed gently at the shutters. A rooster called once from somewhere far off, and a dog barked in response. Then, footsteps. Fast. Familiar. And a knock. She opened the door to find Daniel, cheeks flushed from cold and excitement. You didn't answer yesterday, he said, breathing hard. So I figured I'd come back. He carried a small paper bag in one hand. Warm bread. Still steaming. Leo said your pilot's still alive. Clara raised a brow. He's resting. But not dead? Not at all. Then I have questions. Without waiting, he stepped past her and into the room. Thomas turned his head. Their eyes met. Daniel froze, just for a moment, and then grinned. You really are a pilot, he whispered. Wow. You're taller than I thought. But thinner. Thomas didn't smile. But his eyes narrowed, a trace of humor. Barely. Daniel walked closer, then hesitated. I brought bread, he said, placing it on the table. Leo says food makes people talk. Still no reply. He sat in the chair beside the cot. Clara poured tea into 2 cups. One for her. One for Thomas. Daniel leaned forward. "Did you fly through a storm?" he asked. "Leo said you dropped out of the sky like an angel with a busted wing." Thomas inhaled, shallow but steady. Then said hoarsely, "Yes." Daniel blinked. "Whoa. Real storm, or just clouds?" Thomas swallowed. Paused. Then, "Lightning. Close. Engine caught. Lost height." His voice was cracked glass. But it carried. Clara stopped what she was doing and slowly sat. Daniel's voice dropped. "Were you afraid?" Thomas looked at him. Long. Then replied, "Always." Daniel didn't laugh. "Me too," he said. "But I still want to fly. Leo says I don't have the hands for it, but I think that's nonsense." He held up his palms. One had a scrape across the knuckles. "I fixed the radio last week. Alone. Wires and everything. You think that means something?" Thomas's lips moved. Not quite a smile. But something else. Recognition. He reached out, hand trembling, and tapped the edge of the cup Clara had left him. He lifted it slowly. Sipped. Then lowered it again. A deep breath followed. One that didn't hurt as much. Daniel leaned back, satisfied. "You know, when I was younger, I mean, last year, I thought planes were birds made of metal. And I thought you could steer them just by thinking hard enough." Thomas rasped. "Some days, it feels like that." Clara looked up. 3 full sentences now. Daniel's expression softened. "My brother flew too. 3 years ago. We never heard back. But I think about him every time I look at the clouds." Thomas met his eyes. And answered, quiet, "Sure. He's still there. In the sky." Daniel nodded once, then stood. "I should go. But I'll come back tomorrow. If that's okay." Thomas nodded. Daniel turned to Clara. "You make good tea," he added. She smiled. "That was his cup, not mine." Daniel looked at it again. "Oh," he said softly. "Then it's the best tea I've had." After he left, Clara sat quietly for a moment. Then turned to Thomas. "You didn't have to speak, you know." Thomas looked at her. His voice barely held shape, but it came. "He reminded me of someone." Clara tilted her head. "Your brother?" Thomas shook his head. Slowly. "Me." The room was still. No great change had occurred. But something had opened. Not in the house. In him. The rain doesn't ask permission to fall. Neither do memories. The rain began just before dawn. It was gentle at first, soft pinpricks against the windows, more suggestion than sound. Then it grew. By mid-morning, it had settled into rhythm, steady, cold, and tireless. The kind that stayed for days. Outside, the airfield was a sheet of mud. The windsock hung limp. The mechanics stayed home. Even the crows refused to fly. Inside the schoolhouse, everything slowed. Clara moved carefully, her motions quiet, her breath long. She boiled water with dried herbs and a pinch of salt, stirred porridge with the same hand she used to mend pages, and folded laundry with the precision of someone used to living with little. Thomas sat by the window in the patched chair. 2 blankets around him. A book on his lap, closed. His eyes followed the raindrops on the glass, tracing their paths like threads falling from the sky. No one spoke for nearly an hour. Then, quietly, Clara rose. Took a sheet of paper from the drawer. Sat at the small table. Lit the oil lamp, though it was still early. The gray of the clouds made it feel like evening. She dipped her pen in ink. And began. Asterisk. "It's raining again. And somehow it feels like the rain remembers something we've forgotten. Today, he looked at the sky for almost an hour. I don't know what he saw. Maybe a place he lost. Maybe a person." Asterisk. She paused. Let the ink dry. Folded the page in half. It had no address. She wasn't writing to someone. She was writing to silence. To give it shape. To remind herself that thoughts could still be carried on paper. Behind her, Thomas stirred. Not loudly, but enough to say, "I see you." She turned. He held something in his lap. A canvas pouch, one she hadn't noticed before. He opened it with care. Inside, 6 letters. Folded. Untouched. The edges smudged from time and weather, but still intact. He looked at her. Then spoke. "These were mine." Clara stepped closer. He pulled one out. Held it without unfolding. "We used to write to people we might never see again," he said. "Letters we couldn't send, but had to write anyway." He opened it. His hands shook slightly. "Tom, if you're reading this, you made it through. I went north with Gray and Davies. We lost Harris over the water. I can't forget the sound. If you find that girl, the one from the photo, show her this. Show her you lived." Thomas swallowed. He looked at Clara. There was no photo. She tilted her head. "I lied," he said quietly. "There was no girl. Just the idea of one. I didn't want to be the only one who had no one to write to." Clara didn't respond. Not with words. She simply sat beside him. Took the letter. Folded it gently. Returned it to the pouch. A long silence followed. Not tense. Not strained. Just the kind that happens when someone finally says what they never thought they'd share. Later that day, Leo arrived, soaked to the elbows, scowling. "Still grounded," he said. "Props clean, but the lines are a mess. She won't lift even if the clouds part." He glanced at Thomas. Then handed Clara a small paper-wrapped item. "Found this behind the instrument panel. Stuffed under a gear." She opened it. A thin notebook. Torn. Leather-bound. And on the first page, a name. Clara Vizin. She blinked. Heart paused. "This was mine," she whispered. "From before." She opened it slowly. Pages filled with neat handwriting. Hers. Notes from lessons. Small poems. Words in French and English. The kind of things she used to write before the war took time and rhythm away. "How did it get there?" Leo shrugged. "Your school was raided before it became a field. Probably ended up in a box with scrap, or someone kept it, or maybe it just stayed close to where it belonged." Clara looked at Thomas. "I didn't know this still existed." He looked at the book, then at her, and said slowly, "Some things return. When you stop expecting them." That night, the rain continued. Soft. Relentless. Thomas sat by the window again, but this time not alone. Clara sat beside him. No one read. No one wrote. They just let the wind carry everything it needed to say. Some choices are not made in the sky, but in the silence before it. The morning opened with wind. Not the harsh kind that pulls at trees, but the steady, whispering wind that brushes along the grass and speaks in low, unfinished thoughts. Thomas stood beside the repaired plane. Leo crouched beneath the wing, tightening a bolt with a wrench that clicked louder than necessary. The engine covers were off, the wires exposed, a mess of tubing and metal that should have looked familiar, but to Thomas, it all felt distant. Like trying to read a story he once wrote in a forgotten language. "She's ready," Leo said, wiping his hands with a rag. "Sky's clear. Wind's calm. Prop won't give you trouble if you treat her kind." He stood, glanced sideways at Thomas. "It's a good day for leaving." Thomas didn't respond. He stepped closer, running his palms slowly along the curve of the fuselage. His touch was not one of ownership, but of farewell. Leo didn't push. He knew the look. He had seen it in the eyes of men who returned from the front and didn't unpack their bags. Men who had left once, and hadn't come back the same way. Back at the house, Clara waited. She had not asked if he would stay. She had not offered reasons. Only warm bread, and a cup of tea placed where his hand might find it. Her silence, an invitation, not a plea. Thomas entered quietly. Sat down across from her. The scarf she had once folded still lay across the chair. He looked at it, then at his bag by the wall. "I packed last night," he said finally. Clara stirred her tea, not looking up. "Does it feel like the right weight?" He smiled faintly. "Too light. Everything that matters won't fit." Later, in the small room behind the stove, he unpacked again. Each item placed carefully on the cot. Gloves with a burn mark on the cuff. A rusted compass that never pointed true. A pouch of letters. A small metal bird carved by hand, its wings chipped. He stared at the last object a long while, then placed it on the table and left it there. Near midday, Daniel arrived. His cheeks were red from wind, and in his hands, a folded piece of paper. "I drew this," he said without ceremony, "for when you're up there." He handed Thomas the page. On it, a child's map, the house, the fields, a crude plane, a line of stars leading toward a large compass rose marked, "Return." "There's no real directions," Daniel added. "But I figured if you got lost, this might help." Thomas didn't speak. He looked at the map, then at the boy. Then finally said, "No one's ever made me a map before." Daniel shrugged. "Sometimes we don't need to know where to go, just where we're coming from." He lingered by the fire a while longer, then left as suddenly as he'd come. Thomas held the map for a long time after. That evening, the sky turned amber. A breeze came through the cracked window, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and something sweeter, the drying herbs from Clara's kitchen. They ate slowly, without conversation. Then she stood, folded a towel, and placed it beside his scarf. "You don't have to go tomorrow," she said simply. He looked at her. "I know." A pause. "But I might." She nodded once. "Then tonight stay. Completely. Don't fly in your mind before your body leaves." They sat by the fire. She read aloud from a small, leather-bound book she had found tucked between two dictionaries. A poem about swallows. About wind. About never naming a place until you know how it feels in your bones. Thomas didn't understand every line, but he understood her voice. And that was enough. When she went to bed, he remained in the chair. Watched the candle. Held Daniel's map in one hand, the bird in the other. And wondered, for the first time, if flying away meant losing something he hadn't known he'd found. He didn't sleep. But he stayed. Before you can choose where to fly, you must know where you're willing to land. The morning sky was wide and waiting. Clear, silent, and possibly still, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Thomas sat on the edge of the bed, already dressed, boots laced. His packed bag leaned against the wall. The scarf Clara had folded for him lay beside it. The plane stood ready in the field, kissed by sun and dew. Nothing stood in his way. And yet he hadn't moved. He lit the lamp on the small table and took out a fresh sheet of paper. The ink bottle was half full. His hand hovered above the page. Then, slowly, deliberately, he wrote. To the man who thought falling from the sky was the end. You were wrong. The end was when you stopped remembering why you ever wanted to rise in the first place. You didn't crash into enemy land. You landed where silence waited to teach you how to listen. You didn't lose your way. You just never had one until now. Maybe not flying today means learning to walk again, not from fear, but from knowing who you are when you're not made of altitude. Let the plane wait. Let your heart arrive. He folded the page. Didn't seal it. Didn't hide it. Instead, he set it in the center of the table. The sun was rising fully now, casting soft amber light on the windowsill. A perfect flying day. He stood. Stared at the door. But didn't walk through it. Instead, a sound stopped him. Not a footstep. Not the wind. A low, dragging cough in the sky. His head snapped toward the sound, and his breath caught. A silver glint, low, unsteady, tore across the horizon above the trees. Not his plane. A German one. Small. Fast. But something was wrong. Smoke. Flames licking from the side. Then a lurch, and it dropped behind the ridge. A second later. A thud. Then silence. Then smoke. He hesitated. Only a moment. Then ran. The woods were still soaked from the rain days before. Pine needles crushed underfoot. Branches clawed at his sleeves. The scent of smoke grew sharper, oily and real. At the base of the slope, the wreck. A scout craft, nose first, twisted, hissing. And inside, movement. He climbed carefully, stepping across torn metal, and peered into the shattered cockpit. A boy. No older than Daniel. Face bloodied. Shoulder dislocated. But alive. Their eyes met. A memory punched through him. He was 9. In his grandfather's orchard. Late summer. The air thick with apples and dusk. His uncle, long arms, bright voice, showed him how to fold a paper plane. "You don't need to fly to understand flight," the man had said. "You just need to know where you'd want to land." Now, here, decades later, Thomas looked at this boy, this enemy, and saw something terrifying. Not a stranger. Himself, years ago. Before orders. Before wings with weight. Just a boy. He forced the hatch open. Tore his palm on the jagged edge. The boy whimpered, German, soft. Thomas replied, "I'm not going to hurt you. But we have to move." He lifted him slowly, arm over his shoulder. The boy, whose uniform bore the name Emile, barely breathed. But he walked. By the time they returned to the house, Clara stood at the threshold, eyes wide but calm. Daniel stood beside her. Silently opened the door. No one asked questions. They laid the boy on the same cot where Thomas had once slept. Clara cleaned his wounds. Daniel brought water. Thomas watched. Then finally sat at the table, the folded letter still untouched. He opened it again. Read it. And this time, he smiled. That night, Emile slept. Daniel drew silently. Clara stirred soup. Thomas stood at the window, watching the stars emerge. And for the first time since falling from the sky, he didn't feel lost. He felt landed. Not all journeys end when you arrive. Some begin again when you do. The morning came like any other. The fire had burned down to glowing coals. The fields shimmered faintly with dew. A soft fog clung to the trees, slow to lift. But inside the house, something had shifted. Not in sound. Not in light. But in the rhythm of how the day began. Thomas was the first to rise. He didn't reach for his boots with urgency. He didn't glance toward the airfield. Instead, he folded the blanket at the foot of his bed, took the kettle from the hook, and started the fire without waking anyone. The motions were new, but they already felt familiar. By the time Clara entered the kitchen, he had already set out cups. She smiled. Early. He nodded. Felt like the right kind of silence. She didn't ask if he'd made a decision. Because she knew. Later that morning, he helped Daniel stack firewood beside the barn. The boy was chatty, unusually so, talking about birds and engines, how he once thought the sky was made of glass, and that somewhere beyond it, the stars were just reflections of people we'd forgotten. Thomas said little, but when Daniel handed him a chipped axe to split a log, he accepted it. And split it clean. By midday, the sky was warm enough to walk without a coat. Thomas wandered down the path behind the house, a trail he'd seen from the window but never followed. Daniel caught up to him halfway, out of breath. Found something, he said. From his pocket, he pulled a small disc, rusted, cracked, still bearing a name etched in old German script. A dog tag. Thomas turned it over in his hand. Probably from the crash site. Daniel looked at him. You want to keep it? Thomas considered. No. But we won't throw it away either. He knelt, dug a shallow spot beneath a cedar tree, and placed it there, carefully. Leave it, he said. Some stories deserve to be buried. Not erased. That evening, Clara cooked stew with lentils and rosemary. Emile, now stronger, sat at the table and peeled carrots slowly, concentrating hard. He still spoke little, but he laughed once, when Daniel teased him for cutting everything too precisely. Clara lit 2 candles. Not for prayer. just because the room deserved them. After dinner, Thomas stepped out into the twilight. He walked to the plane. It still sat where it always had, nose to the wind, wings waiting. But it no longer called to him like it once did. It had become something else. A reminder. A relic. A door he no longer needed to open. He climbed the side, opened the cockpit gently, and sat for a moment in silence. Then he reached into his coat, pulled out his old RAF insignia, worn, frayed. He tucked it behind the seat. Not out of shame, but peace. When he returned, the fire was crackling. Daniel had fallen asleep in the chair. Clara sat cross-legged, reading a book by candlelight. Emile snored softly from the cot. Thomas looked around. He exhaled. Clara looked up. "Still yours," she said. He raised a brow. "The plane?" She shook her head. "No. This." He sat beside her. Not too close. Not far. The space between them was exactly enough. Later that night, he wrote one last line in a worn notebook Daniel had given him. "No one asked me to stay. No one begged me to change. They just made room. And in that space, I finally arrived." To be read softly, after the final scene. Some say the sky remembers everyone who ever touched it. That somewhere, between the clouds and the stars, there's a trace of each takeoff. And every quiet landing. Thomas never flew again that season. Not because he couldn't. Because he didn't need to. The plane remained. A silver skeleton in the field. Gathering rust and memory. The boy who once measured time in flight hours. Now measured it in footsteps to the well. In the warmth of a shared chair. In the hush of a night where no one spoke, but everyone stayed. Daniel kept drawing. Emile kept recovering. Clara kept the window open. Not waiting for anyone. But ready. And Thomas? He kept listening. To wind through trees. To stories in soup steam. To the sound of someone moving in another room, and it meaning something. Because staying is not silence. It's a heartbeat. Heard fully at last. And thank you for listening. May your night be slow, and your dreams soft. May the stillness stay with you, even after the story fades. And remember, not all who fall are broken. Some simply land where they were always meant to. Until next time. From all of us here at Deep Sleep Stories. Sleep well.